Let's build a very simple tic-tac-toe game together in just a few minutes. All it does is a simple basic tic-tac-toe game. Anyone can win, the X and O are solved with images, and there is a little bit of JavaScript behind it. Let's get started. So here we are, all I have here is an index.html with a title given, a CSS linked, and a script.js linked up. Among our files I have the O and the X.png. In our style.css there is font imported, some basic settings. We're setting the font in the body, height, margin, some flexbox and some background. Nothing too crazy. And our script.js is completely empty. So in our body we'll be creating a div with the class container. And inside this one we'll be creating 3 more rows. And then inside each of them we'll be creating 3 more divs. They will be with the class cell and idle. And we are basically done with our HTML. This gives us the basic layout, the basic structure of tic-tac-toe game, and we can start moving on to styling this. As for the container, just give it some width and an aspect ratio, set it to 1. Let it use some flexbox. The flex direction will be a column. And also give them some white border. As for the row, their width will be 100%, their height will be 33%, their display will be flex, and justify content space evenly so that those little rectangles are spaced out evenly. As for the cell, which is basically the item, its width will be 16.6 viewport width units. This is because of the division. Its height will be 100% and its border will be 2 pixel, solid and white. We'll be creating 2 more classes. One will be the crossed class. The background image will be a URL with the x.png and its background size will be set to cover. Just copy this over, rename it to circled, and it will be the o.png. And this will be needed because right now there is a class in each of them saying idle. This means that no one has occupied this field yet, and it will be removed. And then later on, either the crossed or the circled class will be given to them. We jump into our JavaScript. We'll first of all create a variable called rows, which will be document.querySelector all, and we are looking for any element with the class row. Copy this over. And now we are looking for the cells, so I'll change the row to the cell class, and we have all the cells available. Now the next part is a little tricky to understand, but I'll explain it as simply as I can. So let board, which will be equal to, so we're initializing the board and assigning IDs to it later on, array, which is the array class, from there is a method derived from this, which will, the first argument receives an iterable object. So I give an object in here and say that the length of this object should be 3. And then it gives an arrow function, which I will say create a new array with the length of 3 and fill it up with nulls. So because by default the array of 3 will be filled with undefined values, and we don't want that. I want to fill it up manually with nulls. And let's just console log this out now, the whole board. So by console logging it out, you can see that it created an array that contains 3 more arrays, of which each contain a null value, which would mean that the whole board is an array, and inside that there are 3 rows, and inside each row there are 3 more null values, basically, which are the cells, which, if you think about it, makes sense, and we can solve it in just 1 line of code. Okay, so we're creating an array which will contain 3 more arrays that will be filled with nulls. That's all we are doing here. Then we are going to go over all the rows, and the first one is going to refer to the element, I mean the first parameter of the for each, and the second is going to be an index, but I'll just call this r as of row. And this will return the row.id, which will be set to the index, which is r. So it will, since we have 3 rows, one will be a 0, one will be a 1, and one will be a 2. That's the ID of the rows that will be given. And now we are actually going to do the same for the cells. So the first one is going to receive the cell, the second will be the ID, and we'll simply assign it. So this cell.id will be equal to the ID. That's all. Now let's create a Boolean value, which I will be calling cross-playing, and it will be true by default because the cross will start. And then go over these cells with a for each loop. And here we are simply going to give each cell an event listener. To add event listener, we are listening for the click event, and it's going to receive yet again an arrow function. And inside this arrow function, so whenever the cell is clicked, we are first going to check in an if statement if it is not in the idle state. That means if it's occupied, then return. So if cell.classList.contains the idle, but here is an exclamation mark, which means that's the inverse. So if it does not contain the idle class, then we are simply going to return. And under it, if it passed the test and it's not yet occupied, then we can say let cur row. So the current row will be parsing it to an int because it would be a string by default, cell.parentElement.id. So if you look at our HTML structure, whenever you click a cell, the parent element of it is always the row. So we are getting the ID of that row. And we are going to do something similar for the cursor, for the current cell, but it's actually going to be far simpler because we are just simply saying parseInt and cell.id. So we have the ID of the current row and the current cell. Now we are going to create a new variable called current player, which will check if the cross is playing. This is a more intermediate syntax. So if the cross is playing, then you say question mark, and the current player's value will be X. If it's not the other one, so if it's not the cross playing, which will be the X, then it will be the O playing, which by this is the default value that it resides to if the other statement, so this one, is false. That's how I can explain it. When you use it more, you'll get to be better with it. And we are going to use it the same again. So let player class will be equal to cross playing. If the cross is playing, then the value will be crossed. Remember, this is the name of the class that we've given in our style.css. Otherwise, if it's not the cross, then it will be the circled. Now the board is a matrix array, so we can refer to its values by the cur row, which is basically the x-axis, and then the cur cell, which is the y-axis, equals the current player. So we are filling up the null values to be either x or o, because now it's occupied, and then the cell.classList.add, and we are adding the player class to it, which the player class, remember, it's either crossed or circled, which will simply set the PNG, the O or X PNG on it. And then the cell.classList.remove the idle. We are removing the idle because by removing it, it won't be clickable again because of the upper statement that we've written below, the conditional statement. And then we are simply setting the cross-playing equal to not cross-playing, so the opposite of it. This will ensure that the players can switch sides and they can go one by one. Below all of this, we are going to create a function called checkWin. And just for variety, this will be an arrow function. It will receive the player as a parameter, and it will have an array in it called winning combos. Now this winning combos I will copy over. So this is basically a big array of combos. In each of them, there is an array and an array of values. This represents our board. And if it's the 0, 0 coordinates or the 0, 1 and the 0, 2, then you win in a horizontal manner. The same here. So this is just a brute force method, but you can copy this over from the source code. And then we return a Boolean value winning combos dot sum. which could also be called any, but there is no such thing as any in JavaScript. So the sum will return true if any of the combo is true, which will check by the combo dot every. So this is yet again an array function, and this will receive an arrow function, which will be receiving x and y array, basically the values from here, and then board x and y coordinates equals the player. So let me just break this up. So what we are doing here is we are checking if any of this is true in the winning combos, that a combo has every field in it the same player, so either all x or all y, and we're checking this against the board. If the same player owns all three of them, then we are going to return true, otherwise we are going to return false. And as for the last one, we are going to create a set interval. This will be every 20 milliseconds. This is just to ensure that we're checking against the winning always at all times. If check win, and remember it receives a player, so the player will be identified by either an X, then alert cross won. As if check win, then now we are checking against the O. If the O did win, then we are simply alerting that circle won. And after the end, if check win X or check win O, which means if anyone has won, then cross-playing will be set to false, and we'll simply copy over the code from the top and reset the board. That's all. And now you would think that this should be working, but not in actuality, because even if someone wins, it won't get alerted. And that's because the ID check is wrong. Here, when you assign the ID for the cells, you actually need to divide this by 3. The reason you need to divide this by 3 is because we only want IDs of 0, 1 and 2. This way it goes from 0 to 8, which is not good for us because we can't check against the ID properly. That's why we need to divide it by 3, and this was one part that I missed when writing the code. And now if you test it out, it should be working properly. There we go, cross won. You could also test the diagonal one. Cross again won. So basically we are done with the video. If you enjoyed it and you found value in it, please consider giving us a like, maybe even subscribe. And other than that, I hope to see you in the next one. God bless.